Have you ever heard that if you want to connect with your audience, it's a good idea to tell a story? You heard that? Okay. If you haven't heard that, it's just a kind of basic thing with speakers. Speakers kind of have learned and tell each other and share this wisdom, and if you want to really connect with the audience, it's a good idea to tell a story. So speakers go around thinking about, well, how can I tell a story, and what story do I need to tell, and where am I going to find a story? And some speakers, stories, they just come like that. I know one guy says, Tim, don't worry, I've got hundreds of stories. I can tell a story I got story after story after story after story. Yeah, it's this guy, he's a rocket scientist. Genius. He's got story after story after story, no problem, they just keep coming to his head. So if you're that way, fantastic. You've got no problem telling a story. But if you've ever thought, how do I figure out what story to tell? And how do I decide upon a story? How do I make a story work? What story should I use? I know I have stories, but how do I get at those stories? If you ever had any of those sort of problems, then you're going to learn something that's going to help you really get at those stories. Because the problem speakers have is that they know, hey, I want to tell a story. The problem is, I don't know how to find that story. I don't know where that story is. Another problem is, I want to tell a story, but I want to make sure there's some depth, some richness, something's going on in the story. Well, how do I create an emotional story? How do I create a story that involves and pulls the audience in and gets them interested in? And when reading through some things, I discovered that those are kind of the same problems. The problem of figuring out how do I tell a story is the same thing as how do I tell an emotional story. But fortunately, the solution is also the same. And that is that if you get at your emotions, if you go through those emotions, the emotions trigger the stories. It's not a matter of figuring out, oh gosh, I want to tell an emotional story, how am I going to do that? It's a matter of getting into the emotion, and out of the emotion comes the story. Great. So now you're thinking, okay, Tim, well, how do I get at these emotions? We've got hundreds of emotions, thousands of emotions. We've got all these emotions. How do you get at these emotions? How do you remember all these emotions? How do you decide what emotions you're going to use? Well, it turns out that some people have done a study in emotions. And there's different studies. There's stories that there's 5 basic emotions. Some say there's 6 basic emotions. The point is that there aren't as many emotions as you think there are. So if you just want to activate that storyteller in you by thinking of an emotion, it's a lot simpler than you think. And personally, I'm going to go with the people who believe that there's 6 emotions. Because these 6 emotions fall into very nice pairs. Emotional pairs. So you remember one emotion, automatically it'll trigger the other emotion in the pair. And you'll get a rich, emotionally deep story. Because it'll have both emotions in it. A friend of mine, Chinese friend of mine, talks about the yin and yang. And if you don't know what that is, you can look it up. But yin and yang so means you've got both sides. You get this side, but then you also have the opposite side too. So the stories balance out. So today you're going to learn about the importance of balancing out stories and creating emotional stories. And you're going to learn 3 basic emotional pairs you can use in your stories. They're tremendously powerful, tremendously useful, and will create deep, involving stories and pull out of you those deep, emotionally involving stories that you have in you. The first emotional pair is something that It's an emotional pair you're probably pretty well aware of. Pretty well aware of, because a lot of life kind of falls into this pattern. And some people call it ups and downs, some people call it ins and outs. You've heard a lot of different sort of ways, but it's this basic emotional pair that can really quickly get you some powerful stories. And once you hear the pair, you're going to say, I know what that is. Of course I know what that is. And then just in hearing it, you're going to start thinking right then of stories that you can use. And the first emotional pair is happiness, sadness. Happiness and sadness, sometimes called the ups and the downs. And notice that it's a natural pair. When you think at times when you're happy, you also think, well, there was times when I wasn't so happy. You think at times when you weren't so happy, you think, well, on the other hand, there were times when I was happy, when things did really go well. If you just think about happiness and sadness, all of a sudden, all these stories start coming into your head. It's a powerful emotional pair. It's an emotional pair that is a depth to it, a richness of it, and it's instantly recognizable. The ins and outs, the ups and downs. It's that kind of way that life kind of gives you, and then it seems to take away. And getting at the times you're happy and getting at the times you're sad and looking at how those interconnect can really help. Common one is in moving. I remember moving from college. I was in college, and then I moved to a city. I moved from a small town, small college, to a big city. On one hand, I was very happy. It was an exciting time. It was great. I was thinking, wow, I'm going to go around there. I'm going to find some new things. I've got an art museum there. My old town, small town, didn't have an art museum. They got an art museum there. They've got one of the great symphonies. They've got incredible ways to get around. I mean, you can just get around with anywhere you want. You can get there by public transportation. You don't have to have a car. If you don't have a car, great, but you can get there public transportation. In a small town, there wasn't too much in the way of public transportation. Bike, a few taxis, that was it. Big town, you've got L's, you've got subways, taxis. It's also great public ways to get around. So I'm like, great, it's going to be wonderful. So I go there, and it is wonderful, and great, and exciting. But some of the things I missed in the small town. I knew people in the small town. I knew it. I had my circles of friends. I thought, I don't have my friends anymore. How am I going to meet somebody? I suddenly realized that I was older. I was an adult now. I wasn't a child anymore. I had to start acting like an adult. It meant taking on some responsibilities, but it also meant pressures, problems, issues I never had to deal with before. Paying for the rent. Paying out money on a monthly basis. It's a challenge. Just moving from small town to the big city. I thought about sometimes, some nights, I just thought about all the things that I missed that I wish I'd have again. Well, you get the idea. There's a story. Happiness and sadness. Where you go with it, how you take it, what the point of the story is, it's a whole different matter. But at least you have a story. And in going with happiness and sadness, already you have a story that people can relate to. Ideally, your story will end up happy, or the sadness, somehow there'll be a learning, there'll be an understanding, there'll be some sort of awareness, a transformation that comes out of it. But just simply thinking of when you were happy, and what happened to it, and how did that, when you're happy and when you're not happy, when you're sad, when you're not sad, how that all works out. Happiness and sadness is a powerful polarity that quickly creates a story for you. So happiness and sadness is one simple polarity, and a powerful one. But there is another one. Another polarity that really opens things up. This is a polarity that the poets talk about a lot. A lot. There are entire plays written on the subject of this emotional polarity. It's something that's instantly recognizable and incredibly powerful. It can lead to happiness and sadness, but it's something in its own right. It's something by itself. And that second polarity is love and disgust. Love and disgust, or love and disgust. On the one hand, there's love, and if you've ever been in love, you know that feeling. Everything is fantastic. You're in love. It's a wonderful feeling. It's incredible. And there's a story there. Usually involves somebody else. Usually you're in love with someone. Now it might be a situation where you're in love with yourself, but probably if you tell that story about how much you're in love with yourself, you're probably not going to get too much sympathy from the audience. But when you're in love with someone, now that's a connection story. You look at someone and you just think, so wonderful, they're so beautiful, they're so great. You see them picking their teeth, you think, what beautiful teeth. By the way, that's how you know when you're in love. You start seeing people doing things that anybody else would be really gross, and they look cute when they do it. That's definitely love or something the heck like it. But with love, and the height of love, comes disgust. Somebody who you're just repelled by. You don't want anything to do with them. One of the toughest ones is where someone's in love with you. They just love you. You're up here. And you are just kind of disgusted with them. You don't like them. You're not interested in them at all. But they love you, but you don't. And you really don't. There's a story right there. Love and disgust. Powerful polarity. Especially if you work it into some sort of a triangle. You love someone, and someone else loves you. You're disgusted by that one. The one you love is disgusted by but loves the one you don't love. It can get very weird. Very strange. It's powerful. Just think back to the first love you had. First love. Wow. Remember, was a child, really young. And there was a girl. And she was gorgeous. Brown hair, had ringlets. I was really young. I didn't know what ringlets were, but I knew it was kind of that curly sort of hair. And she was great. She was wonderful. I saw her, I'd be happy, I'd look out for her, where she was. And when we got together, it was just great. Wonderful. And then, as happens, part ways, get older, go on to other people. And then, went on to somebody else, and just somebody else. And then it worked the other way, where they really liked me. I wasn't interested in them. They just kind of creeped me out. I was a teenager by that time, and just kind of gross and creeped me out. I didn't even think about it. It was just not a good situation at all. You get the idea. Love and disgust. Love where you love someone, and disgust where you're disgusted with someone. That polarity, if you work that out in your story, is a powerfully emotional thing. And get your mind going. Get those stories happening. And there's one more. One more polarity, and then you'll have all six. All six the balances of all the different emotions you can have. Well, you may think there was a lot of emotions. Actually, supposedly, there's 6. And this one is something that gets you into a mood and gets you into feelings that are very intense, but very different from happiness and sadness, and very different from love and disgust. This really gets you to incredible power, incredible lack of power. And that is anger and fear. Anger and fear. And the thing about anger is anger drives you forward. You get angry, you're driven forward, you're going to attack, or you're holding back from attacking. Fear drives you backwards. Fear freaks you out. Anger gets you moving forward. So already you can see, as a speaker, tremendously useful. You're moving forward towards the audience, you're getting bigger. You're moving backwards, you get smaller. So if you got stories of anger and fear in them, all of a sudden the audience sees you kind of change in size up there. Big, small, back and forth. The thing about stories of anger and stories of fear is that they bring in tremendously strong physical reactions. You're talking about getting angry and getting fearful. You don't have to say, well, use more vocal variety, or, use the body gesture a little bit more. No. You just get into the moment. You just get into the moment. And sometimes you get so afraid, you get angry. Like a while back, long time ago, again I was a child, got lost. Got lost out in a ghost town. And long story short, a ghost town is simply a place where they used to mine for gold, and they stopped mining for gold, and then everybody kind of moved away, and this shell of a town was left behind. Well, in this case, this ghost town, somebody else had moved into this ghost town, fixed it up a little bit, but since they'd done all this mining, there was all these piles where they'd been mining, big piles of dirt all around, and big, huge pools that are filled up with waters that originally were mine shafts. So this ghost town was a very dangerous place for a small boy. Well, one day I wandered off and got lost behind one of these huge piles. And when I got lost, I got so mad at myself. I thought, oh man, I did it now. Here I am, I'm lost, I don't know where I'm going, I don't know what's happening. Jeez, I wish that had happened. I wanted to get back home and get some stuff done, and now I can't do it. It's just so annoying. That was my first reaction, the anger. And then after a while, it got darker and darker. I started to realize that I didn't know where things were. I was wandering around out there and wherever it was, but I wasn't recognizing anything around me. And every time I went around those big piles of dirt, I just saw more piles of dirt. There was no town, ghost or otherwise, anywhere. I was just lost. That really started to sink in. And I got really scared. That's the beginning of a story. But you see the idea of anger, fear. Just getting at those two emotions brings stories into your mind. So that's how to create emotional stories. All you have to do is to relive that emotion, get into that emotion. And the good news is there's only 6 of them. And you can think of them in pairs. First emotion, happiness and sadness. It's one of the simplest, one of the easiest to access. Just take a time when you're happy and when you're not happy, that's all. And then tell a story, or even just start telling a story about when you're happy. You can't be happy all the time. There has to be some sort of balance. I'm happy, 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 okay, and then I wasn't so happy. And then I got happy again. That's how it works. Happiness and sadness, a natural emotional polarity that's powerful in getting these stories into your head. Or love and disgust. Now maybe you never felt really disgusted by someone. But you can think of disgust as simply a non-loving. So, something you love and something you don't love. Extreme is disgust, maybe it's a little less than that. But you get the idea. This idea of love, of exaltation, just loving everything and just being entirely surrounded by really loving, presumably, that other person, whoever they are. And then disgust, where you're repelled, you physically want to move away. You do not. Love is an attraction, and disgust is just, you want to get as far away as you can. Have a story that's love and disgust in it. Very powerful. And then finally, anger, fear. Anger and fear. And they can go together. You can get afraid, and then get really afraid, and then just and get really mad at yourself for being afraid. That happens. They're natural emotional polarities. You get angry, and then you get afraid. You get angry, and you do something you regret. And then you're afraid of what might happen afterwards, because you got so angry. Anger and fear balance each other out. Just think of a story when you're angry, probably fear will come into it in some way. Think of a story when you're fearful, probably you're going to get, somehow there's going to be anger in that story too. But it's tell powerful stories because they have these emotional polarities in them. Big challenge is to figure out, how do you tell stories? Because stories are so incredibly powerful. Stories pull people in, get them involved, get them interested, get them thinking about what you're saying. Make a point, tell a story. An old saying of many speakers are aware of. But how do you get at those stories? You do that with emotions. Emotions open you up, and it'll open you up to your stories. If you just start going through those emotions in your head, suddenly stories will pop to your mind that fit those emotions. That's how the mind works. Stories are not rational. They're emotional. They're all about these emotions that you have in you. So you get at those emotions, you get at the stories. And once you get at those emotional stories, you start writing them down. Get from a great emotional story, fine, write that story down. And the emotion that goes with it. Okay, happiness, sadness, here's my story for that. Here's 3 stories for that, 10 stories for that. Love, disgust, all right, here's 5 or 6 stories for that. Anger, fear, here's 4 or 5 stories for that. Write them down so you have the stories. Because once you have the stories, when you start putting those speeches together, you've got all these stories lying about there about happiness and sadness and anger, disgust and fear and anger, or love and disgust. Then you can start using those. Because then they're all right there. Then you have a story file. Just a list of all the stories you have, all the good stories. Stories are powerful. Get in touch with your stories by starting exploring your emotional polarities.